Welcome to RealGM Radio. A lot to get to on today's show. The playoff push is in full swing. About a month left in the regular season. Teams are jostling for playoff position. The Thunder just beat the Celtics. The Cavs are on a roll. A lot to like about the Warriors and the Lakers when healthy. We're going to talk about the best case scenarios for all of these playoff teams with Matt Moore. If you're a playoff team, we'll get to you. Let's jump in. One of our favorite regular guests here, Matt Moore from the Action Network, the Locked On Podcast Network. He comes on every month to look at the league through different tiers. What's up, man? How you doing?
Good, man. I'm tired. Nuggets, Wolves was an 8 o'clock start, and I would just tell you, if you were a listener and you were below the age of 40, be aware that at the age of 40, your ability to do things like go to a basketball game until 11:30, and then do an hour of post game, and then drive home an hour, and then do a show dramatically reduces. So,
is there any chance that starts at 33 years old? Because that's how I'm feeling lately.
No. Because it was like in my 30s, I was like, yeah, this isn't as easy as it used to be. And in my 40s, it's like, I want to die.
Well, at least I have that to look forward to here. It's been a long season, Matt. It's been a very long season. We're in the stretch run here. We're taking a look at the league through our different tiers. What did you cook up for us today?
Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of how many rounds can you win, right? Because I do think when we talk about this, it's more of from the perspective of, oh, they're good enough to win the NBA championship. And it's like, okay, but how likely are they to actually get there? Right? Or like, hey, I like this team if they face off with the Boston Celtics, but you have to get there first. And a lot of that is about matchup versatility. Can you beat a lot of different teams that are in front of you? And so when we get to there, it's like, okay, if the right sequence lines up, and we're talking fully healthy, not how can I put this? What Boston did last year, like if they have the right, it's not injuries. It's just like if they hit the right series of matchups, if they avoid the ones that will kill them, how far can they go? Or is it just like, no, there's too many matchups where they're going to be at the losing end and they're just not quite good enough to be able to get there. So it's a combination of how good are you and how matchup versatile are you? And those two combinations, I think, give us a pretty good sense of how to tier these teams by, can you make the finals? Can you win the finals? Can you only make the conference finals? Because like, I also, by the way, sidebar, think that should be a much bigger deal. The Final Four is such a big deal in college basketball. It's way harder to make the Final Four in the NBA because you have to win 7-game series. We should be celebrating the Final Four in the NBA way more than we do.
Trophies?
No trophies. Just like, hey, they were a Final Four team that year.
Is it harder? Is it harder to make the Final Four to win the in-season cup thing?
It's harder to make the conference finals.
That's what I think. And you get a little banner for the in-season tournament.
Yeah, but something. I think it's more of just about like we just needed to show more respect, because this is the whole thing with the rings culture thing. Is just the idea is, oh man, they got killed in the conference finals. It's like, yeah, they still made it past 25 other teams.
Right.
Like, put some respect on their names, man.
Yeah. Shout out to the Lakers from a few years ago. They need more respect, right? We need to give them their due. So part of this too, then I would imagine, is some of these play-in teams, Minnesota, for instance, right? They're 7th in the West while we're sitting here. They would have to. I'm assuming you're not going to include the play-in tournament and how many rounds you can win. We're just going to assume that these teams could make it out of the play-in and then maybe move on. But the point being is that the path here really does matter for a team like Oklahoma City, which is going to get the 1 seed here. Their odds of going through multiple rounds is a lot easier than a team like Minnesota or even the Golden State as the 6th seed. Depending on if they're able to move up into that 4 or 5 range, their path is just a little bit harder. So those are the kinds of things that we're taking account of too.
Yeah, and like I think a lot of it is just like the East. I think like I mentioned, it's such a big deal because it literally is like, look, you can have all of the matchup stuff that you want, but you got to beat Boston and then you got to beat the Cavaliers most likely. Can you do both of those things? Now, there's things that can like disrupt this, right? Where if we have two teams that if we have two teams that are like, oh, hey, they can't make it past the conference finals and they meet in the conference finals, guess what? One of them's going to make the conference finals. But that's also kind of, to me, is like an indication of how a fluke run can occur, where you should probably be like, well, it wasn't necessarily about them. It was more about like what happened in the course of the playoffs.
So let's jump in. Do you want to start at the top with the teams that can win the most rounds, or the bottom?
No, let's start at the top. No shocker here. It's Cavs, it's Thunder, it's Celtics, and it's those three and those three only. Those three are the only teams that deserve to be in this conversation. Those are the 40-20 teams. Those are the teams that I think have every single matchup. Like I just don't think you can make any sort of reasonable argument to say that those teams are only like, oh yeah, I think the Thunder can only win the conference finals. Like, no, if they get to the finals, they're live. I think last night's matchup with Boston, even though it wasn't a playoff matchup, and Celtics fans will scream about this, that, and the other, and they're right about some of it. I still think if it gets to be Thunder Celtics, I'm going to be like, no, the Thunder can win this. Like, they are definitely live to win this, to the point of like, maybe they should be favored. They're going to be each of these teams will be favored against any other matchup. There's no like Cavs Celtics probably is going to be Celtics favored just because of market perception. But like, I think that's a very coin flippy series. Thunder Cavs would be very coin flippy. So these three teams I think are very even, but they're also at the top. And there, to me, is a very big difference between them and everybody else.
So let's get into last night's game a little bit. I mean, the thing that stands out, and this will be interesting if this does end up being the NBA Finals matchup, is the dialogue around this and the way that it's covered, 3-pointers versus 2-pointers. And there's going to be a weird split, I think, between people who cover the sport in terms of which team they like and maybe are sort of a little biased and rooting for, or whatever it might be. But last night's game I thought was really interesting for a lot of different reasons. But the Thunder's physicality really stood out to me against the Celtics. And the Celtics even talked about this after the game. Maybe they weren't prepared for that. They sent the Thunder to the line a bunch. And this is a Celtics team that has, I think, the second lowest free throw rate given up to opponents in the league. So this is not something they normally do. But they also don't normally play the Thunder every single game. And the Thunder have a way of making you do things that you don't want to do, right? They kind of have that fear factor where you're always kind of hearing footsteps and there's always something going on when you're playing OKC. I think that that's going to be a really big part of this if this is the finals matchup. And when I was thinking that watching the fourth quarter last night, man, I was like, who is this more helpful for, this game? And for the Thunder, at first blush, I was like, the Thunder. This is more important for the Thunder. As confident as they are, as cool as they might seem, they're the young team. They're the team that have to prove it. Boston's coming off the win last year. Now this is a regular season win that means a lot to Oklahoma City. But then I was thinking about it, and I'm like, maybe that meant more for Boston, because then they realized, oh, these cats are just different. And we're not going to be able to do the stuff we normally do. We actually have to up the physicality factor if we're going to compete with these guys in a 7-game series. I actually think they might have more to take away from that game than Oklahoma City does.
Okay. So I said the game was more important for Boston than it was for OKC going into the matchup on Wednesday morning on Locked On NBA Daily. I said that, like, look, the Celtics have to be able to prove that they can generate the offense that they want to generate versus an elite defense like this, because it's one thing to put these numbers up versus everybody else, but can you do it versus an OKC team who's so good on the perimeter? And then OKC let them shoot 63 3-pointers. And the answer is like, yeah, but look at the percentage. And like, I'm going through the clips, and this is what I love about basketball. It's also very hard to litigate or argue, right? Is that I can show you clips and be like, that's an open look that Derek White makes a lot of times. And a Thunder fan will be like, yeah, but look at Lou Dort's closeout. And it's such a great closeout. Like, it is. It's a phenomenal closeout. But did Derek White miss it because of the closeout, or did Derek White just miss? I don't necessarily love that we're to this point, but I do think this is really pretty relevant. I thought the Celtics had the ability to bully you a little bit last year defensively. I just think that with their switching and their physicality, and they'll get into you. I just don't think they're that team this year. I just don't. I have a post up about their road to the finals on my Substack. And one of the things it talks about over at Hardwood Paroxysm is about, if you look at it, their ranks are all down. The numbers are all better, which is very interesting. It's like, like they're not as good in terms of all of these ranks. Like it's a flip. They're better in terms of how they are relative to the rest of the league in a lot of categories, but their numbers are also down. So how do you parse that, especially with how good some of the elite defenses are, like OKC? And what I kind of wind up coming to, I think, is that I don't necessarily think that the Celtics are one, they're not as good as last year. They're just not. But to me, that game last night was like, I don't know how you walk away from that game and be like, hey, we let them shoot 63 3-pointers. Great job. I don't know how you do that, because I feel like over the course of a series, you're going to wind up losing out on this. And Celtics fans want to make this into like, well, it's about the matchups and Tatum and Brown and this and that and our defense and the schemes and Joe Mazzulla. No, none of it. Zero. Zilch. Do you make your threes? Do you generate and make enough threes? That's it. This Boston team has gone so far into the, I've called it leaning into the bit. They have leaned so far into the bit that they have lost the vision of being a defensive team that does peel switches perfectly and rotates awesome and has all this positional versatility. Every time that you get them out of their comfort zone and they have to generate twos, they don't look good, they don't look comfortable, and they don't succeed. But they gave up 63 3-pointers. So I walk away from that game being like, I don't know what to make of this. I think the physicality, you're right, bothered Boston. But do I think it's going to bother them over the course of a 7-game series enough for them to miss enough threes? I don't know.
Right. And that's the big thing too, is now that they've seen this physicality, they've witnessed it in person, do they just say, all right, we need to kind of up our own physicality factor while also taking these threes? Like, physicality doesn't necessarily mean like getting to the rim and putting your shoulder into a guy 6 feet from the basket. It just means like fighting through those screens, doing the things that Oklahoma City always does with just all their muscles and limbs. That's really what I'm kind of talking about there. And you're right. I mean, I kind of like the way that you've broken out these tiers, because we're not talking about like, are the Celtics in a tier by themselves, right? We have a very finite amount of how many rounds can you win. And obviously Boston and Oklahoma City, and we'll talk about Cleveland here in a second, can win the same amount of rounds, which is to say 4. But for the for the Celtics to do it, I just see the path easier for them, right? Because they are 3-and-D personified, right? If 3-and-D became the in vogue thing, every team wanted a 3-and-D player. They just said, we're just going to be 3-and-D as a team, and that's essentially what they do. 20 games this year, they've made 20 or more threes. They're 18-2 in those games. One of those losses was last night against the Thunder. Yeah. That is an interesting thing to be like, what do I take away from that? But I do think I agree with you. Over the course of a 7-game series, I kind of like Boston's odds to make enough threes. And then you look in that game, like you mentioned Derek White, and I know that you were just using one example, but he was 6 of 12 from 3-point range. Tatum and Brown were combined 4 of 18 from 3-point range. I just don't know how many times that's going to happen.
But the bigger one is Drew Holiday was 1 of 7, and he's the guy that I have my eye on. I love Drew. I don't know how you don't love Drew. Drew is everything that's right with the NBA. For all of the nonsense that people have to put up with, there is Drew Holiday, who is about the right things, has always been about the right things, and is an NBA champion caliber player. I'm concerned Drew's off the cliff, and I do not think people are prepared. He shot 62% from corner threes last year. It was ridiculous. He is no longer shooting that way. The above the break numbers are a little bit better. Great. You got to hit the corner threes. That's the trigger mechanism. If you're going to put 2 on ball in those screen actions, that's where that shot always winds up at. So he's going to make those. And if he's just a little bit worse from the corners and on defense, that's a drop. If Horford's just a little bit worse above the break and on defense, just a little bit worse. The margin here I think is really interesting. You mentioned the number of threes. So I looked at percentage. Last year, when they shot at or above league average on 3-pointers, the Celtics were 43-5. They were 21-13 when they were below. Okay, so let's look at this comparison. 43-5 versus 22-5. 22-5 is still a pretty good record. It's a phenomenal record. You can look at it so many ways, because it's like they already have as many losses already when shooting league average or better than they did last year, but they're still 22-5.
Right.
Okay? When they shoot below, last year, 21-13, they're 25-13. So they have more of them this year, and they're already at that same number. So the answer is they're worse than last year, but they're still might be better than everybody else.
Right.
That's the question we kind of have to get to.
100%. I want to get into how the Chet Holmgren thing factors into this. And by the way, really quick on Drew Holiday, I didn't love that contract when they signed it to him. I was like, are we forgetting how old this guy is? And that has a potential to age very poorly. But Drew Holiday might be one of those guys too, where just every team in the league might want him anyway, despite the fact that he's making $30+ million a year for the next 4 years. But whatever. Chet Holmgren to me was one of the guys that I was watching very closely going into last night's game, and the way Boston guarded him, kind of baiting him a little bit, maybe not baiting, but maybe betting against him by putting a small on him pretty often early in the game, and then obviously having Tatum positioned to switch whatever the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander pick and roll was going to be and whatever, all that kind of stuff. But that didn't work. I really liked Chet Holmgren's first half of that game. I thought he was really aggressive. It reminded me of the high school mixtapes we saw with Chet, where he's just like always flexing and kind of getting into people's grills, and he's kind of always that, but doing it against high schoolers. That's kind of what it looked like when he was posting up Derek White. And that he might be the biggest X factor in this game, because even on the other end, they tried to attack Chet, and it didn't always work. And I know every Celtics fan is going to say, well, just wait until we get Kristaps Porzingis back. I don't know how that factors into your calculations here. To me, Porzingis is just he's off my board. I have no idea what to expect. He's got a mysterious viral illness now. The injury history is what it is. It's not only possible, probably more likely than not, that we got the last great year of Porzingis' career probably last season. Like, does he have another year like that for him in Boston? I don't know. And he didn't even play in the playoffs. So until we got to the finals. So I don't know. How are you considering the Porzingis part of this? And do you agree with me that Chet Holmgren is probably the biggest X factor if this is a final series?
I ranted about this again on Locked On NBA Daily today. I was like, look, every team's got injuries. You got to stop doing this. Every single team is like, well, so-and-so wasn't out, so it doesn't count. Mm-hmm. Do you not look at the injury report for the other team? Oh man,
Jalen Williams for OKC.
Exactly. Yeah. J-Dub's importance defensively is, I think, very underrated. The more I've started doing film work on the OKC, mm-hmm. It really stands out how good J-Dub is defensively. Let alone the offensive stuff, which you can kind of have your question marks about. And it's like, well, they don't need J-Dub as much as they need Kristaps Porzingis. And I'm like, really? The team that's entirely built on shooting threes needs the big man more? Come on now.
Right.
Does Kristaps help? Yeah, he's a really good player, and he really completed him last year. I don't know about that this year. And in part, that's because the chemistry between Jaylen Brown and Kristaps Porzingis last year was terrific. Like, Jaylen and Kristaps connected, and they had a thing. Now, even when you have those two guys, just not the same. Jaylen's not the same. And so you kind of get into this weird kind of situation. I think that the Holmgren stuff is kind of interesting, because you can definitely tell that they were kind of testing that dynamic as far as what it goes. But I will say this, look, Celtics had a 117 offensive rating versus Chet. I think that's really interesting. The overall numbers for this game is Boston losses on the defensive end. They had a 117 offensive rating in a playoff game versus an elite defense. That's more than good enough. They lost this on the defensive end, which I think is really fascinating given all things considered. And it does kind of show hey, this is where your 3-point volatility kills you, because a Boston fan is going to say, well, yeah, but if we shoot more threes, okay. But let's move you up to league average. If you're up to league average and J-Dub has a little bit more versatility, given how the OKC led this essentially wire to wire, you only move back into kind of a coin flip. That's what I think is where we kind of get to with this is Boston, I think, needs to be favored in almost every series. I do think the question of who should be favored in a Celtics Thunder series is fascinating. I think it's a fascinating question because OKC is going to have home court advantage. So you have to give them a significant edge there.
And they're 2-0 against Boston in the regular season.
2-0 versus Boston regular season. And the Celtics are the defending champs and they have this experience edge. But there is a chance that just OKC is just flat out better than everybody.
Yeah.
The believers in OKC will go back to that. It's just look, man, they're just better than everybody. They're just better than everybody by margin.
The way to beat Boston, right, is they're gonna win the 3-point shootout part of this. They're gonna. In a 7-game series, they're gonna come out probably with the advantage on that.
Right.
Can you just win every other battleground, every game of that series? And if there's any team that can do it, that I have the most confidence in doing it, it would be the Thunder. I think they can win the foul battleground. I think they can win, obviously, the 2-pointers. They can win the rebounding. They can win they can win the snot factor battleground. They can win all that stuff, but they have to do it 4 games out of 7. And that's how they win that series. So tell me what you like about the Cavaliers.
The defense has gotten so much better. You look over the last 2 months and I was ready to be all right, they had their run, but now it's we know what they are. They're an elite offense and they're a pretty good defense, but probably not good enough. And now because of how well they're defending schematically, the fact that they're getting better is very encouraging to me. because I kind of expected them to rest on their laurels. You just don't see teams that win at this rate get better as the season goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about win percentage. It's not about point differential. I'm watching the ranks of where they stack up in these categories because they had such a huge advantage offensively for that first 3 months of the season, which is a long time. They're up to 8th in defense, and that's with them coasting and resting guys.
Yeah.
They're just finding ways to be able to produce the kind of defense that I think that they need to. People are going to single out the Darius Garland 2 smalls argument, and I think it's a good one. I think there's definitely ways to exploit Cleveland. One of the things that Cleveland has shown, however, is for every way that you can exploit them, they have the personnel, coaching, and tactical advantages to punish you back. Because the things that you have to do to punish a two-guard lineup like that are things that they're going to use against you with their speed, quickness, in particular, their three-point shooting and ability to reverse the court with the ball. They have such great movement in terms of being able to shift from strong side to weak side. It's probably the best in the league. And that to me is significant. They've got so many contributors like Ty Jerome who can dribble and create. They've got spot up shooters. They've got weapons like DeAndre Hunter. They have a lot of different weapons here that they can go to overall, depending on the various matchups. Now that's like matchup agnostic, where it's like if you get them in a series versus the Celtics, I was ready to be out on them at halftime of that final matchup.
Mm-hmm.
The Celtics had 26 3-point attempts, and I was like, you can't do it. If you're going to give up this many 3-point attempts, you're not going to beat Boston. I'm sorry. You gave up 51, 61, 49, and now you're at 26. And then they allowed 13 in the second half. So right when I was out, the Cavs pull me back in. And that to me is going to be the question, because you kind of mentioned, you're going to lose a 3-point battle. Can you win everything else? I disagree, because if you just deny them catch and shoot spot up threes and be like, you can score any other way, run all the Luke Cornett pick and rolls you want, Boston gets rattled. They just are not comfortable. They've worked on it. That's why I think it's interesting. Because if you look January, February, Boston spent a lot of games where it actually kind of felt like they were attacking the inside to be like, hey, we got to get better at some of this other stuff. We got to work on slips and screens and switch attacking. But the answer is like, they're not as good at that stuff. Like they just needed to try and get Derek White and Peyton Pritchard shooting open threes.
Right.
So if you're able to contain those, I think it goes a long way. Do I think Cleveland can do it 4 times out of 7 in a series? I do. Do I think they will? That I don't know. I just don't have a confidence level in that.
There is the best case scenario, going back to the sort of the theme of the tiers. They can do it. I agree with you. They can 100% do this. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen is just such an albatross to have to get through on a possession-to-possession basis, whether it's both of them on the court or one of them at a time. They're both awesome. And that can muck up a lot of stuff. And the Cavaliers are also the only team that's really in the same ballpark in terms of making threes with Boston. And they can get them up and they can make them a lot. My favorite thing about Cleveland, you mentioned the defense starting to trend right in the right direction. They might have the best number 2 scorer out of this whole group that we're talking about with Darius Garland. I'm still not sure how much that's going to matter, but I know it's going to matter somewhat, right? And Garland picking it up the other night when Donovan Mitchell was out, the Cavs rallied back from who were they playing? It was I can't remember who they were playing, but they rallied back, and Darius Garland had that incredible fourth quarter and all that kind of stuff. 10 points in the first 4 minutes of the fourth quarter, and you just see what's possible with him. And we all talk about Donovan Mitchell taking such a step back, and that's kind of part of his MVP candidacy narrative. Darius Garland has taken a major step back for Cleveland. He makes an all-star team. They trade for Donovan Mitchell, and he's just like, all right, I guess I'm not the star of the team anymore. And he's totally cool with it, except for the little stuff that happened over the offseason, but we don't talk about that. But he's totally cool with it, and then when Donovan Mitchell is out, he steps in, and he's been awesome. And I think that scoring is really going to matter, especially that one-on-one scoring. I think we just forget how freaking good he is in terms of a one-on-one live dribble threat who can just make stuff happen, not just for himself, but for his teammates. I think that's huge.
He's the one guy, though, that I think you can look back and say he hasn't had a good playoff run yet. Donovan's obviously really good playoff runs. Jared Allen actually had one with the Nets. He was really good in their playoff run, relative to his role, right? Mm-hmm. Mobley, I thought, figured it out last year. He struggled in that first Knicks series, but then like last year versus the Magic, he got more comfortable, and he was better in that round versus Boston in that when they got to the next round. Mobley's the one that I look at. Garland still has to answer that question of like, all right, when this turns into this, what's it going to look like for you? Mobley, though, I think it's really interesting. Let's take the you can't really do this, right? Because I think everything with basketball is systemic and about how the five interact with the five. But let's take it out and let's just say this. Like, if I told you, hey, Evan Mobley had a better series than Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps played, but Evan was better in that series. Would you be shocked?
Not even a little bit.
If I told you he was better than Karl Anthony Towns, would you be surprised?
Nope.
Okay. So then it's like he was better than Chet Holmgren. And Chet's great, but I do think that Evan, like, no, I would not be surprised if he had a better series than Chet Holmgren. If he had a better series than Aaron Gordon, if he had a better series than all of these other guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he can be that. If he's able to be that guy, I think Mobley's maybe the most fascinating player in the playoffs for what he can provide.
That's a great point. I love that. Why not have the Nuggets in this tier? If the idea is that it's sort of, maybe I'm looking at it wrong. Are you telling me that the Nuggets can't win the championship, basically?
They cannot. So Nuggets fans will tell you, actually, I have them too high because I have them in 3 rounds. They can make the finals. They can't win it. New York, Cleveland, and Boston are all matchup problems for them. Boston, what you didn't used to be, but Boston is now with how the team has changed, losing Bruce Brown and then Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Those are small changes, but they're very important when we talk about how the Celtics play. Denver is a team that neither can generate enough threes, nor make enough threes, nor prevent enough threes. If they don't allow a lot of threes, they can win the series and a game in a series. If they make a lot of threes, they can win a game in a series. But they have problems with both, where there are nights when it's like, hey, they made a lot of threes. Yeah, the opponent made 8 more. Oh, hey, they only allowed them to take 33 pointers. Yeah, they made 2. They're always at a math disadvantage. They are always worn down. Murray's been playing really great basketball. The problem is their record versus great teams, and I tend to disregard most of that stuff because I've noticed that most teams are under 500 versus other teams over 500. It's hard to win games versus good teams in the NBA. Shocker, unless you're one of the elite squads. But Denver in particular is really bad at top 10 teams in point differential. They're really bad. They're 3-15 in those matchups. They can't beat great teams. They can beat good teams. They can catch you on a night. They'll take a game or 2 off of OKC. They'll take a game if OKC gets knocked out early. They'll take a game or 2 off of Boston. They'll take a game or 2 off of Cleveland. They'll take a game or 2 off the Knicks. But they're the team when I look at the Eastern Conference matchups. Like the Nuggets are one of, I think, a few teams that are better off in the Western Conference. If they were in the East, I'd be like, I don't think they could. I think they're a 2-round team. As it stands, I think they can make the finals, but then they get killed in 5 games versus any team coming out of the East.
So I think you're right. I hate it, right? Because the reason why you're right is the lamest possible reason for you to be right. It's the math. It's the math part of this, and that sucks. That's a super lame reason, but it's not incorrect. It's.
So here's the thing. I will say this. It's when they make more threes, they have a losing record this year. Okay, so. Yeah. The key is it's about what does the game look like? What does it feel like? What's the flow of it? And their bigger problem is they have to play Jokic at the level of the screen because that's he's so bad at drop. He's just bad. Even when he's good, he's bad. So they have to play him at the level, and he's good at the level. He's a really capable defender, even at this size that he's at currently with this many miles on him. He's still very effective at containing and deflections and everything else. But teams have figured out, oh, we got to move Aaron Gordon's guy up above the break so Aaron can't make the baseline rotation. And it's either going to be Christian Brown, Jamal Murray, or Michael Porter Jr. Christian's too small. Jamal is small and too slow, and MPJ is too slow. So every time, if they play the corner 3, they get back cut layups. If they play inside to prevent layups, they get corner 3s. If they manage both, the short roll guy winds up getting a bucket. They do not have the defensive personnel to execute their scheme. And that to me is why they can get past 3 because they got Jokic and they're still really good. But it's going to take the right matchups just for them to make the finals, and then the magic runs out.
Because they could do theoretically all the things that we were just talking about with OKC, where they could just win the 2-point battle. You just, stay disciplined defensively, don't foul a ton. You can win like all these other battlegrounds. And I'm not even talking against Boston necessarily, just whatever opponent. But they are so behind on the math, so underwater on it. Like it's not an OKC situation where the Thunder are still league average plus in 3-point shooting, where Denver is just, we don't really even do it. And when we do it, it doesn't look right, and we're out of our style, and it just doesn't work, to your point.
Last night, I think, is a really great example of this, not only because of the Wolves present a terrible matchup for them,
right?
But if you look at it, they gave up 10 offensive rebounds in non-garbage time. 10. That's not bad. They gave up 27 points on those 10 offensive rebounds.
When you get them, you score.
They didn't give up many turnovers. They gave up like a 1.4 points per possession mark off of turnovers. Their transition defense, I've said this multiple times, it's not the worst in the league, but it feels that way. Nobody gets back. And so you're always in mismatches. You're always on the wrong matchups. You're never set. You're never locked in and making the right decisions. Their defense is not good enough. Like that, if you want to simplify it, that's it. Their defense is not good enough for them to win 4 rounds, but their offense is good enough for them to win 3.
So I'm sorry if I jumped ahead, but did you have the Nuggets in that next tier as the
Yes.
third? You did. Okay. And who else is in that tier then?
So teams that can make the finals but will lose there. It's a very small group, and it's 3 West teams. It's the Nuggets, the Lakers, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I have the Lakers there because basically it's built on, after last year, I cannot discount the possibility of a team being reconstructed and then making a run through March and stuff that makes no sense to me defensively just working. Daniel Gafford was never a good defender in Washington. Not ever. I don't want to hear about like, well, no, if you look at, no, I'm telling you, I watched Wizards games. Very few people did. It's like me and the guy from Locked On Wizards. Daniel Gafford was horrendous defensively. And then he turns into Dikembe Mutombo when he gets to the Mavericks. And a lot of that has to do with like, yeah, he's competing for something. And I get that. But this is the same kind of deal to me where I was like, they're going to get destroyed. They're playing Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, and their center's Jackson Hayes. Pick your poison. Like, what do you want to do? That's a buffet. And then I went back and I actually did the film work on the Lakers, and I cannot believe it. It really does work because Jackson's so versatile, and DFS and Rui are smart enough, along with LeBron, to crowd that weak side of the paint on switches so you don't get the back cuts and you don't get the corner threes. They navigate the back screen to get the corner 3 open as well as any team I've seen do it. They are like, JJ's coaching his ass off.
Yes.
And so if the defense isn't bad and you got Luka and LeBron and shooters, I have to be like, yeah, you can make a finals run. This is possible. This is on the table. OKC.
Well, wait.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. One more thing on the Lakers defense too. You're right about JJ. He's kind of using all of the things that he was talking about in his podcast.
Yes.
Defensively. Like all those like buzzwords, like the peel switch and the scram and scramble and whatever. Like you can just, he's like all of it. It's just on a whiteboard somewhere in Los Angeles. He's like, we're doing all of these things. And a bunch of the players are like, what are those things? And him and LeBron are sitting down with 2 mics and being like, this is what it is. Yep. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And I was with you. I was like, I don't know how this team's going to defend. It also just felt, because it was just assembled in midair. And I'm like, that it's really offensively, you could figure it out with the shot making and the talent. Like you could just figure it out midseason. Defensively, like these principles start taking hold in training camp. So how are you going to figure this out? They're figuring it out. And I'm with you. I'm like, this is incredible. They're totally bought in. Jared Vanderbilt cannot go not discussed here. Him coming back and being a part of the rotation and looking right has been enormous for them. His activity is crazy. That guy is on basketball cocaine every defensive possession. He's doing multiple things every defensive possession. I love watching him play. DFS has been great. Go ahead.
I love Vando and think he's awesome. I will say that somebody told me, and his overall numbers have gotten way better over this last stretch of games. Somebody told me last year, or 2 years ago when they traded for him, they're like, love Vando, but like he's a hustle guy in the playoffs. Those guys don't translate, and it kind of worked out that way.
Right.
It has only recently come that their defensive numbers have kind of switched. If you look at like the period since the trade, right? If you look at actually like since post All-Star, what I think has been, because Locked On Lakers was very big on like Jared Vanderbilt is basically Dennis Rodman. They are slightly worse with Vando on the floor defensively than they are with him on the court. So I do kind of I pump the brakes a little bit on that. But one thing that I think that should be noted, OKC was really glad, I think educated guess to hear that trade, because that gets Luka out of Dallas, and they didn't want to deal with the size and physicality with Luka. It creates a different problem if the Mavs have been healthy, but they don't have to worry about that anymore because the Mavs imploded. Luka, though, causes a lot of issues for them. Like he causes a lot of problems for them. The other thing here is I think Minnesota is live versus any of that's why I have them in 3 rounds. They can make the finals. They match up so well when I go down the list of teams. And then I get to the Lakers, and the first thing that goes through my brain is Luka Doncic is going to shoot 400 free throws in that series. Like he's going to shoot 60 free throws in every 4 games sample, and they're not going to be able to not foul him. So they're the one team I think that is very good versus that Wolves team. And so when I look at those combinations and everything else, now there's a possibility that just like this is smoke and mirrors, and they face the Nuggets, who like everyone did the podcast on how JJ Redick solved Nikola Jokic. And then teams did that for a while. And Denver was literally purposefully not doing counter adjustments to that screen, not to hide it. But there's 2 ways of approaching when you have a tactical adjustment to you. You can either counter adjust, or you can try and play your stuff to out execute it and just break it anyway. And if the Nuggets were able to just like post up and beat all of those fronts and doubles and without having to resort to using Jokic off screens, then that means they don't have to use that stuff. You're always trying to keep your stuff back. And so they were trying to see like, can we do this? And then versus OKC, they were like, no, OKC is good enough. Let's just run Jokic over 500 screens. And then that's how they beat the Thunder on Monday on the back-to-back without J-Dub. So there are counters that they have here, but I just think that the Lakers and Wolves are very live to make the finals.
I had the Wolves here too. I did the same. I looked at my list. I was like, I think they can make the conference finals. Why not? That stat is making the rounds. They're 11-0 in their last 11 games with Julius Randle, and everybody's like, see, it does work. And I'm like, all right, let's hold on there for a second. But it's not as horrible as it was, and so I'll concede that. I do think that Julius Randle adds something that they need. I'm not saying that he was the perfect player to trade for, but in terms of a guy who can create a shot on his own, they didn't have that in the playoffs last year. So there's that element there somewhere. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm very excited about all this. Here's a fascinating, I think, insight into how the NBA works. 3 months in, I started dosing this in November and then followed it in December, and I finally wrote about it in January. The numbers basically said this: Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle absolutely killed everybody in their minutes. You had Ant in there, they killed them by just as much. You add Jaden McDaniels, and all of a sudden it drops off a cliff. You take Rudy Gobert off the floor, and you have Julius and Jaden, and they're a huge negative. And so I really and I'd heard that there was concern about Jaden McDaniels and his approach this season. So I really narrowed down, and I kind of came to the conclusion, look, you can play Julius with Rudy and Ant, but you can't play Julius, Rudy, Ant, and Jaden. Can't do it because Jaden's not a floor spacer. And then Julius goes out, and they get past the deadline. And I noticed Jaden starts playing better. He's more aggressive off the dribble. He's finding ways to score that isn't just him spotting up. He's finding ways to contribute on offense, and his defense gets back to the level that we were used to seeing it last year. And that broke him out of that, where he became a huge positive over that span when Julius was out. And so I was like, all right, let's see what happens when Julius comes back. But instead, Jaden's still playing that way, and Julius is playing more integrated, and now it works. There might be still problems when you get into certain matchups and how teams defend certain actions, but I do think that Julius's overall play style can be very complimentary. I was very impressed with him in that Nuggets game last night because he's not forcing the issue as much as he used to. He's kind of he's starting to be like, wait, we can really win it. I don't need to set, because I think a lot of guys literally are like, hey, I want to contribute. I want to do what I can. And I know I can take over the game offensively, but that's not what's best for the team. And instead, I think that he's really starting to integrate into what they need from him, which is pick your spots and be effective when you get them. And I'm very impressed with him, with Jaden, with Ant. the maturity with Finch, whole thing. I'm in on the Wolves.
I'm with you. I have to be with you. McDaniel's just been playing better since the All-Star break. 19 points per game on good shooting. All the things that you're talking about, totally there. He's doing stuff off the ball now. He's like cutting, which is great. Yep. And with Randall, he's been really deferential, and I want to give credit to Anthony Edwards for that. That's the Ant factor. That's the intangibles. That's that Michael Jordanism. That's what all these people talk about. And sometimes it just feels like it's hyperbole, but that shit's real, man. When he's the alpha in that locker room and you're Julius Randle and you walk in, and Randle had been in New York for a long time. Brunson came in after he was there. All this stuff. He might have still thought, okay, I'm the All NBA guy. This is sort of my team and Brunson's. He's in Minnesota. He's like, this is obviously Anthony Edwards' team. And I think that's a huge factor. And he deserves, by the way, Randall, a ton of credit for taking that step back. They're fourth in offensive rating over their last 10 games. I'm with you. I think maybe we too many people wrote them off when Randall was just not an instant fit, and with McDaniel starting the season in a slump or whatever we want to call it. They just wrote him off. But since these guys have been clicking, they're starting to resemble the team that made the Western Conference Finals last year. So I have to put them in here. And then you look at the only reason, not the only reason, but I suppose the biggest reason why I pause here is just because they're currently in the play-in tournament. Maybe they can climb their way out of it. I don't know. We'll see. But either way, we're talking about going from the bottom of the playoff standings to the Western Conference Finals. It's a tough road. But they can do it. I don't think you can write them off, especially when the framework of your tiers here is sort of a best case scenario.
Yeah.
Tell me about your next tier.
All right, this is 2 rounds. They can make the conference finals, but they can't win it. Golden State Warriors, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Indiana Pacers, and then 2 teams that you are not going to believe that I have here: the Los Angeles Clippers.
Yes.
Oh, this last one though. And the Phoenix Suns. Yep.
Okay. The Suns are not in the playoffs.
I know. I understand.
We're not going to tease it. Give me the juicy Suns stuff right now. I need it.
So here's the argument. They have that Clippers game, and they're down 25 at home, and the fans are booing, and everybody's like, this is like rock bottom. Like, this, it cannot get worse, and everyone is clowning it, and it is absolute disaster, and everything is awful. And you get the altercation between Budenholzer and Durant, where he rips his arm away. And Durant leads a comeback, and he scores 15 in the 4th quarter, and he trusts Colin Gillespie. And then after the game, he sticks up for Mike Budenholzer and is like, you have no idea about my relationship with my coach. That's how we are, because we're both competitors. And then they go out, and they won that game. They go on the road to Denver, and they lose in overtime to the Denver Nuggets in Denver. Okay. Now, since then, it's like, yeah, but Matt, they got waxed, but like they lost to the Rockets. Schedule's brutal. Schedule's really brutal, and it's not necessarily going to get that much easier. I am telling you, though, that I see something. There's something with this team that I do think that they're starting. They've been at rock bottom for so long. And if you're like, well, how are they going to win these series? How are they going to do this? And the answer is, they've got Kevin Durant. Devin Booker starting to play a lot better. Like there's been like a little uptick with Devin, and he's starting to look a lot more like himself. Bradley Beal is still a drain on society. I get it. Defensively, the problems are there. But again, I always look at these defensive issues and they're like, all right, do you have the personnel to figure out some stuff? And when they've got Royce O'Neal and they've got some switchability and they've got them some different type of options, there are so many vulnerable teams in the Western Conference that I'm like, yeah, I think that there's a run there. If you're asking me how's this Sun season going to end? What's the highest probability end? They don't make the playoffs. They probably lose in the play-in tournament. They get bound and they don't even make it. I am saying, though, that I do think that there is a possibility in there with how Kevin Durant is playing, with a Mike Budenholzer team, with what I've seen from them, even in these losses, which have been tough, and with Kevin Durant and the trade rumors all over the place. To me, I'm willing to go out on a limb and be like, I see something there that I do not see with some of the other teams that I find in the Western Conference. A lot of this just has to do with the fact that I think the Western Conference is it's not mid. They're all really good, but they're all really vulnerable. And so if you catch them at the right moment with the right matchups, I think a lot of teams can make a run. And I actually think the Suns are better than their record.
So I agree with you on that last part, that they're better than their record. And if you look at what the formula always was for Phoenix, it was absolutely bonkers on offense, just super elite, and just good enough on defense, right? They were never going to be top 10 defensively, but can you be 12, 13, 14 in that range? Over the last 10 games, they have an offensive rating that would be second in the league. Elite. That would be an elite offense, obviously.
Yep.
I'm with Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. There's something there. This is their last gasp, and at least they're not going down without a fight.
Yeah.
They're 3 games back of Dallas right now. I think I have that right. Dallas seems motivated to 2.5 games back of Dallas. They could catch that. They could catch Dallas and end up with the 10 seed. Sacramento's 4 games ahead. That's a little bit tougher. Not much runway here.
The problem there is that they're 2 games back in the loss column from Mavericks. I'm not worried about that. The problem is that no team, and it's small sample, which everyone reminds me of, like, it's small sample. It's also the entirety of the existence of the play-in tournament is my counter. Mm-hmm. No 10 seed has made the playoffs yet. Nobody's made it out of the 10 into the playoffs. But I look at the Kings and I'm like, boy, I don't know. I don't know here. And them being 5 up in the loss column, it's like, come on, are the Kings going to blow a 5-game lead in the loss column? And I'm like, they're 33-31. Teams that are 33-31 can blow a 5-game lead in the loss column, but the Suns are going to have to get in gear. They're still 2-8 in their last 10. I understand how psycho this sounds, but it's the one team that I kind of want to go out on a limb on and be like, I believe this team is better than what the resume says. The counter, I think a really good counter to this, the one I always keep going back on is, can you really make a run? Because you have to have belief in yourself if you're going to make a run. Can you make a run if you're like, Katie's gone this summer? We know this. It's over.
Yeah.
Can you really do it? Maybe there's a little bit of like F the haters that they could just like rally around for a season, for 2 months. It is very unlikely, but I did want to include them based off of how I watched them over the last 10 days or so. No, 2 weeks.
I almost want Durant to go into that locker and be like, guys, I'm gone this summer. Let's one last hurrah. You know what I mean? Like, just provide clarity and everybody just be like, all right, cool. Yeah, let's just, at least we know. It could have the opposite effect. I'm glad you had the Clippers in this tier because I ended up doing the same thing, and I can't believe this, Matt. I have 2 rules about covering the NBA. Never believe in the Clippers and never watch the Hornets past February. And frankly, I've broken both of those rules this season. But I couldn't say that the Clippers could do worse than this. I'm with you. I have Western Conference Finals ? Next to them in my notes. They need, obviously, Kawhi Leonard and Norm Powell to be healthy. When those guys are healthy, this team, by the numbers, is nothing short of elite. Nothing short of elite. It's a smaller sample, all things considered. But why did you have them on your tier, in this tier?
Great defense and Kawhi.
Yeah.
It's not, for me, the Clippers are a simple one. I don't trust their offense. I don't like a lot of the deeper roster stuff on them. I actually think they missed Terrence Mann quite a bit. He's been balling in Atlanta.
Yep.
But here's a thought hypothetical. Let's say that they get the 8. They slide all the way down. They wind up in the 8th seed, and it's OKC. You get a foul-prone team versus Harden and Kawhi and Powell. I always think, as good as Hartenstein and Chet are, as like we all love them as NBA wonks and analytics people, like, gotta love that combo. They're so good. Nobody realizes how good they are. Nobody realizes how good they are.
Zoo.
Botch.
Yeah.
So Zoo has the capacity to just get offensive rebounds and put them back, and that negates a large amount of what Hartenstein's able to bring to the table because Zoo's just bigger.
Yeah.
You do have a pick and roll mechanism, I think, that can cause the Thunder problems. As good as the Thunder are in terms of applying pressure defensively, Harden is so smart at punishing you for it when he is on one that creates real issues. Kawhi, there's just you can put Dort on him and Dort will foul out. You can put anybody on him and Kawhi is going to either score or he's going to foul them out because he's so big, so strong, so quick, and so precise with his movements. I like Ty Lue. I think I'm always struggling with whether Ty Lue is as elite as people say or doesn't get enough credit. And I don't know where to fall into that category. I think sometimes he gets too much credit. I think sometimes he doesn't get enough. I do like his ability to maybe make matchup adjustments. I felt like he really botched last year versus the Mavericks. I feel like he coached a horrible series, but maybe he coaches a better one versus a Thunder team that looks a little bit different. Mm-hmm. If they face the Lakers, as Lakers have owned them a little bit this season, they've had the advantage. But hey, Luka versus Kawhi, that one's a little bit interesting. I like the size advantage. I like their ability to space the floor, even though they don't have a good offense. I think that you have to look at the Clippers and be like, yeah, things went right. They could get there.
Who else did you want to talk about in this tier?
I want to talk about the Pacers, the agents of chaos. There is just a capacity here for Indiana to ruin. Like, they live to ruin your day. Like, they don't have championship expectations, but they're just like, we're going to compete every night. And they do. They really do. And the defense had like rose to a good point and then has slid off. But I think that shows that, like, hey, if they can find the right frequency. I think we saw this in the playoffs last year. Everybody kind of wrote them off in terms of their defense. We're being like, because of the way that they play. But I'm like, they got stops last year.
Yeah.
And it's until your guys were injured. They still got stops. Like, they held Damian Lillard scoreless in a half. Like, they've done the thing. And they've been so much better at that this year. And I think Pascal Siakam, as much as I love Tyrese Halliburton, Siakam is a matchup problem for a lot of these teams. Milwaukee, I think we can say, not definitively, I think Milwaukee's actually better matched up with them this year than they were last year because of guys like Taurean Prince and Gary Trent. But Milwaukee still doesn't feel comfortable in that matchup. Boston is not. They swept them. They talked about this. They hated that matchup. They're not comfortable in that matchup because the Pacers games can get, you look up and you're just like, this game is not what we want it to be.
Right.
And I value that so much about being able to take elite teams and be like, you don't get to play on your terms. You're going to play on our terms. You can beat us, but you're going to have to play our style of game. I think the Indiana Pacers have a legit shot of making the conference finals that way.
I love the Pacers. Halliburton is playing at an all-NBA level after his slump to start the year. He's been awesome. That game against Milwaukee the other day, Siakam's defense against Giannis, I mean, that's a thing. And if they meet in the playoffs, it will be a thing. I think he's been fantastic. Thomas Bryant has really kind of helped shore up some of those bench units there behind Miles Turner. Nembhard, we know, is just he's a gamer. That guy's a playoff performer now. And I really like what they're getting out of Benedict Mathurin, which was an ingredient they didn't have last year. But you have a little bit of a downhill attacker, guy who can get to the line a little bit and stuff like that. But the point about them playing their style, they always play their style. They never not play their style. And I love Rick Carlisle's commitment to it. He was mic'd up in that Bucks game talking about pace and paint. And I love that. I was like, that's so simple, and I know exactly what you want. Push the pace, push it all the way into the paint, and push it down their throat. This is not a finesse team, despite the fact that they play fast. They are not a finesse team whatsoever. This team has a bunch of MFers on it, and they will get into your grill, and that's a big part of their style of play too. They're like the Jeff Goldblum of the NBA, where they're very specific in what they do. They're not able to really do other things. Like, Jeff Goldblum's not in The Departed, right? But like he's, right. But they crush it every time they do the thing that they're really good at. Yeah. And now every time Jeff Goldblum is in a scene, it's a Jeff Goldblum scene. Doesn't matter who's on screen with him. And every time you play the Pacers, it's a Pacers game. They set the terms of engagement. It just feels like a Pacers game.
Bucks is pretty simple. Just like, look, the defense is better than kind of the worst overall numbers show. When they look bad, they look terrible. But if we're gonna do this based off of like, hey, if things go right, what does it look like? I definitely think the Bucks are dangerous enough to make the conference finals. I might have put them in tier 2 they could make the finals if it wasn't for certain questions I have about Dame. Memphis is really good, and nobody believes in them, and I get why. I'm also just kind of like, look, Memphis still has, like, nobody really realizes how good Jaren is. Nobody really realizes how good Jalen Wells is. Nobody realizes that they have so much lineup versatility. They can find lineups that will hurt you. Mm-hmm. Santi Aldama, who I was never high on, I am so high on now. He has been so great for them. My question for you, as somebody that is familiar with both Jimmy and the Warriors franchise, I have not been able to figure them out yet. I got to do like a deep dive to understand them. Are they, everyone is ready to anoint them as like a contender down the line, but there's a big gap between them and these top teams, and these top teams usually don't make like a finals run if they're not a top 3 seed. What are your thoughts on the Warriors? Like, what's the limit for them?
I can't. There's too many matchups that are too big of a problem for them in the Western Conference that I can't get fully on board. And I love this 10-1 run, 11-1 stretch, whatever they are, since Jimmy Butler. It's mostly cupcakes. And even when they've played good teams, the Knicks, for instance, they didn't have Karl Anthony Towns, the one guy who was a matchup issue for them in that game. I like Jimmy Butler. He's the guy he's the one ingredient that fixes a lot of issues for that team, or addresses, not fixes, but addresses a lot of issues for that team in terms of this team doesn't get to the line, Jimmy Butler does. This team fouls too much, Jimmy Butler does not foul. This team turns the ball over too much, Jimmy Butler never turns the ball over. All these things that they need. They needed another good defender outside of Draymond, that's Jimmy Butler. I like Quentin Post. He seems like a nice guy. Yeah. Really? We're going to do Quentin Post against Zubac? We're going to do him against Jokic? If that's the 3-6 matchup, they're toast. Like, forget it. And that's like everything we talked about with the 3-point math. I just think that they would have a field day. They would score 100 points in the paint every game. And I can't get behind them. I like it. It feels a little honeymoon period to me. A little bit. But all that stuff with Jimmy Butler, the other thing that he gives them is an identity when Steph is on the bench. And that was the thing that they missed the most. No team missed their star player, I would argue, more than Golden State did this season without Steph. Jimmy erases that completely. He gives them a belief, all these things. I also haven't seen playoff Jimmy since round 2 against the Knicks in 2023. And he just hasn't been that playoff performer since. And it's fair to I could, if you say that guy's still there, I could totally believe you. I could also believe you if you say he's 36 years old, odds of that guy being there probably a little bit lower.
Guy Santos is like a plus 16.
You just start naming these names. They're not the deepest team. They might be the most shallow team in the league right now. And we're talking about, the playoff teams.
The playoff Jimmy thing, I've joked multiple times. I'm like, yeah, no, they're set for playoff Jimmy as long as they face the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs. Wait, no. So that's kind of how I feel. I've given the Warriors conference finals appearance because I don't know what to do with them. And I don't want to dismiss the idea that instead of the Lakers, that they're the team that made the post deadline trade and they go on the run where I'm like, what is this? But I am no longer going to get caught napping on relying on pre All-Star data. So one round teams that I think can only win one round of the playoffs are the Rockets, the Pistons, and the Knicks. I have the Knicks really far down here. Look, if somebody knocks off Boston unexpectedly, if they catch a weird matchup in the 2-7 or disaster strikes, then sure, the Knicks can make the conference finals. But I have zero confidence that Tibbs has. I made this when I wrote about them for the Substack. I said, look, maybe it's possible that Tibbs is just like he has a super secret plan to fight inflation that he's hiding, a super secret plan to prevent the Celtics and Cavaliers from destroying them defensively, and he just hasn't shown his hand. Nothing about Tibbs' career makes me believe that that's how he's wired, that he's saving something for the postseason. Yeah. He doesn't save anything. And so the Knicks are actually a really comforting team because you know what they are. They're going to tell you throughout the course of the season, we are this good, we are this tough, we are this accurate, we are this whatever. They're a really great offense. Their defense is not good enough. I like some of the matchup stuff. It's not going to be enough. They lose in the second round in 6 games.
I agree. They would need superhuman stuff from Jalen Brunson, even more than they've been getting over the last 2 years in order to really make it deep, and I just don't see it happening. The other thing about the Knicks, too, is they don't even have that benefit of, well, just wait until our starters play more playoff minutes. They're already playing playoff minutes. We know exactly what this Knicks team is. And because of that, there's like that margin built into their opponent where they're going to start playing their guys' playoff minutes. And then that margin shrinks a little bit between the two teams. If it's a Knicks-Pistons series, I've been thinking about this for about a week. Yeah. If that's the 3-6 Knicks-Pistons, I really would like to take the Pistons for content. Yeah, but...
Want to.
But the fact that I even want to, I guess, is sort of the more interesting point here than whatever my prediction would be. It's a bad matchup for the Knicks.
Yeah. I think so as I kind of mentioned, a Tibbs problem is that their teams don't have an extra gear.
Right.
You can't, if you play this hard in the regular season, you don't have another gear you can get to. And I just don't know how you argue otherwise. Like last year, like they played the same gear that they always did, and it was enough to beat the Sixers with all of their Sixersness. And then they ran out of steam versus the Pacers, and they would have beaten the Pacers. Like they would have probably beaten the Pacers if they weren't so banged up. But I will say, like Indiana came into your house and beat you in a game 7. Not great.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. Like Jalen Brunson got hurt in that game. They were already down big.
And that team was so different. Like that team had a backbone defensively that this team
so
does
tough.
not have. Yeah.
The Pistons thing, I think, is usually teams that are that young, they get hit with that extra gear and are like, whoa, this is basketball that I have never played.
Right.
I have never played it this intense, this hard, this physical. This is not, I am not used to this. I am uncomfortable and I am overwhelmed. And it takes them that experience in order for them to kind of rally and then go forward. If the Knicks don't have that gear, then what does that look like? The Pistons are going to feel, if the Pistons steal game 1, like panic is going to set in. I just think panic is going to set in. But the Knicks are also like, they are way better. Like I think the Pistons have punched a little bit above their weight over the last 45 days or so. And I love it because this team is hella fun. And I was in on them in preseason. And I think it's a phenomenal story. And it's so cool to see Detroit basketball back. But also like, there's a good chance that the Knicks are just like way better than them. And that's it.
Yeah.
But it's not zero that they upset them.
Yeah. I mean, Cade. Would it surprise? Same Evan Mobley thought exercise, right? Would it shock you if Cade Cunningham was the best player in that series? No, I don't think it could, right? And then you got guys like Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart who would make it their life's work to make Karl Anthony Towns' life miserable, and they would probably succeed. And then you have a guy like Asar Thompson who would get the Jalen Brunson assignment. He would be seeing Jalen Brunson in his mirror. He'd be seeing him so much. So
imagine.
I think it's interesting.
Imagine in Game 5 in Madison Square Garden that Tobias Harris has 37 points and the Sixers have to watch that.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Really quick on the Knicks, the Josh Hart thing is starting to become a problem with how teams are leaving him open. It's more disrespectful than it's ever been. It's borderline Russell Westbrookian at this point, and it's just something that I'm watching in any series. It's been a thing all season for them, but at some point, Tibbs doesn't like to make adjustments and major changes throughout, like especially in the playoffs. Based on he's very much of a dance with the person that brought you here kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there's going to be crunch time moments where Josh Hart just can't play, and he's been very reluctant to acknowledge that this season. It's just a thing I'm watching there. Who else?
Rockets. I don't think that they have confidence in their guys to be to close. There's a matchup like I got them winning one or able to win one round, and you can argue that it's like, can you really put Memphis and Houston in different tiers? And I think it's fair because I do think that Memphis is flawed in a lot of ways. Like I talked to 2 different scouts that were just like, nope, they're just running, not going to work when they get the half court offense still isn't good enough. I'm like, but it's better, and they're like, it's still not good enough, and that's fair. But Houston's is outright like very concerning. And the Jalen Green stuff, every time that they're like, no, Jalen's figured it. What? Maybe not. Like every single time. Are there matchups where I think the Rockets can ruin some team's day? Absolutely. Like there's so many where it's like, if they're the 1-8, which is possible,
right?
And it's like, that series is going to be nasty because I don't think OKC matches up well with them, and Houston thinks they can beat them. If it's Denver, Houston, they've got some matchups coming up, and I really want to see them. Joker was out for the first one this season, but the Rockets had a lot of success against Denver last year when Denver was a better team. So I'm not ruling out that the Rockets could be a team. Like it may be that I have drastically overestimated the Nuggets and they don't have matchup advantages over anybody because we're getting real low in terms of like how many teams I'm like, oh, the Nuggets match up well with them. That number is getting small in the Western Conference. So yeah, I think that the Rockets can make a run. To make the playoffs, it's the Southeast Division. It's Hawks, Heat, Magic. They can make the playoffs, and that's it. None of those teams can win a round. None of them.
No. Last thing on Houston too, their defense has slipped. I know they've been dealing with some injuries, but that was sort of the whole thing, right? Because we knew what their offense has been this whole time. If there is a team that would wish that you would go from a 7-game series to a March Madness style winner take all, one game at a time, it would be the Rockets, because they could win any of these games because you could just get lightning in a bottle with Jalen Green. But getting lightning in a bottle with Jalen Green, who has this outsized importance to their offense, especially in the half court, getting that for 4 out of 7 games, it just feels like an impossibility for everything that you already said. But yeah, I think that's sort of the point with Houston too, is that they know that they need that guy, and just getting to the playoffs is sort of the win for them when you consider the expectations going into the year. I agree with you on the Eastern Conference. Not even a point to talk about those teams. Like even if Orlando were to be healthy and it's just not that, it's not their year for them. They've sort of been figured out.
Yeah.
On both ends, kind of a little bit here. So that's it, right? Those are all the teams you had.
I just want to say I think the Kings can win one playing game. That's where I have them, and like I don't know if that's insulting to them. It might be. Like they're fun, and Demonis is really good, and I actually think Levine's really good. I just the fit is so watching what's happened to Keegan Murray since DeRozan showed up. It's just like it just makes me sad. It just makes me very, very sad. But it might be. I understand if you're a Kings fan, you're like, you have the Suns above us. I get it. I understand. But I really want to stress, if it's Kings Suns, I'm probably like the Kings probably win that game. I want to be very clear on that. And then Eastern Conference, I don't think I have anybody else. Nope, I think we covered everybody. Just Southeast. I wish things had gone differently for Orlando this year. It's a bummer the way that it worked out.
So it's 7 Hawks, 8 Magic, 9 Heat, 10 Bulls. 2 of those teams have to come out of the play-in tournament because that's how it works.
Yeah. I have it right now. I have Magic and I have Heat and Hawks coming out. I have Magic missing.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
It wouldn't shock me if it was Bulls Hawks.
Orlando's an interesting question just from the first 5 games of the season, their offense looked dramatically better and different. And then the injuries hit and they've just slowly gotten worse. And one of the things that I learned from the 2021 season where Jamal Murray got hurt, the 21-22, is that when Jamal Murray and MPJ got hurt, a lot of guys that were not built to play that many minutes had to play way more. And it just by spring, they were out. Will Barton had nothing left and was he was gone. That was it. It was the final season from his NBA career, or meaningfully. And that's how it feels with the Magic, where it's just like their guys are just like toast from having to pick up the pieces for all those injuries. It shows you kind of like the underrated impact of injuries. Everybody's got them. And I say that night to night, but over the course of the season, some injury situations take so much more out of you because guys are having to do so much more than they can reasonably handle physically.
It's a great point. That's definitely the case with the Orlando Magic. Matt Moore, you always do a great job. Thanks for the tears. Thanks for the time, buddy.
Thanks for having me.